So this is the default level of the O3DE engine project. This is something that you can just, if you for instance start a new level here, I think like new level, and then you have default level that already has like a standard floor, standard, let's say, visualization environment and a shader ball. I don't have to make it one now because there's already one that's already provided, and you can kind of like look around. Although I really like this the shape of this shader ball, for sure. This is not something that I would like to have in my final project. So ideally you would like to hide it. I've tried that before. Unfortunately, if you only hide it from the entity outliner, as you can see it here, then what will actually happen is that if you play the game here, and you can do that with either going to this play button or do Control G, which I'm going to do now, you can still see the shader ball. It is potentially like maybe would be a nice feature for O3DE, and I might submit an issue for that, to be able to actually disable this entity. But I've heard that people just said like, okay, yeah, you can also disable the mesh, for instance. So like if I would unhide it, and if I would disable the component mesh component, which is like the one who kind of gives shape to the visualization of this entity, then you won't see it either. So I guess there's pros and cons to both these approaches, and I think it's just like maybe potentially like just a preference, let's say. So let's enable this component, but I'm going to do a little bit more drastic. I'm just going to delete it, that the project itself is a little bit more cleaner. Although the shader ball is nice to test out some rendering in this game engine, but that is potentially not my goal here. Is to first just do the simplest of the simplest, just make a bouncing ball that I can control, and hopefully it can control itself. I won't come to the part that it will actually control itself during this Twitch, but I will definitely go through all the steps of how to make a mesh, how to add materials to the ball, how to add key bindings, how to add a very simple camera rig, and to be able to also be able to assign certain behavior, let's say, or in this case, like, you know, some forces that you can give to the ball itself. So that is going to be kind of like the approach here. This is now the time, now that we actually remove the shader ball, to add a new entity. And you do that by right clicking on the entity outliner or in the scene itself and create entity. So it's entity 1, that's kind of like the standard. But I want to change it, so there's something that you can do like by either rename or F2, adding a different name here. So I will call it Roboball. But it's an empty entity, so you don't see anything here. There's nothing specifically hidden. There's just nothing in this entity right now. So that means is that I would need to add some form of mesh. So you do that by add component right here, and then you look up for mesh. You have the mesh under graphics mesh and mesh. There's still nothing here to be seen. So I hope you're able to at least, let me just make the transform a bit closer. I just have to make sure that I'm not hiding anything with the camera. So that is just something that I just need to be aware of. And well, as you can see, it's an empty entity, so you don't really see anything right now. But I can add at least a mesh file to it. And since it's a very simple, I just want to have a sphere. That's all I want. So there is actually some primitive mesh files for that in 25.05, which is the current release of O3DE engine that I'm currently using. Within gems and primitive assets, objects, primitives, and then sphere 1 by 1. So it's in very big spheres, like 1 meter in radius. So there you go. So you have it. So we have a sphere right here. Let's play the game. So yeah, but it's right now kind of like embedded into the ground, but it is actually full sphere, as you can see here. So we just have to make sure that we can transform it. So let's click on the entity again, like either in the viewport or the entity outliner. And then you can go to transform. And then add like, you know, it's actually 1 meter in diameter, so then you have to add like a half a meter. Unfortunately, this is in meters. For anybody that's joining from the US, it might be a bit challenging, but like I guess like I don't know like in what sense like for game development you prefer to use like inches and feet compared to meters, but I'm used to meters, so that's what I'm going to use. It's now a ball, you can see it, the game can actually see it if I play it, which is now going to actually add a material to the Roboball entity that I've just made. Is done by simply selecting the Roboball entity and add a physics primitive collider. So physics. So now I'm kind of getting an error. So it says this component is missing and require an component service and it has been disabled because it's missing a component. Well, I know just the fix for that because you can actually add required component. And okay, so you have 3 options that I can add. So like either a physics character controller. To be honest, I have no idea. Like I guess like it's maybe a character, but let's say I'm just going to actually do a physics dynamics rigid body. So it's like, you know, it's not going to be static, it's not going to be standing in the air. It's going to be a physics dynamic body, a rigid body. So I'm going to select that. Okay, so you see that both the physics dynamic rigid body and the primitive collider have both been selected. Okay, so the primitive collider has been added. I've added a physics dynamic rigid body, but if you can see, there's this weird gray box around the Roboball. So that is actually called collider, but it is not really a box, let's say. It is, yeah, like, well, it is a box right now, but the shape itself, the mesh itself is not really a box. I can potentially just kind of like see, like if I, for instance, would put the Roboball like a little bit more in the air. Let's say put 2 meters here and transform. There I go. And I would play it. Okay, so that looks pretty same, but that's because the box will just bounce, so it already has a little bit bounce. But if I would rotate it, let's say 45 degrees around the y-axis, then, and if you would play, then yeah, it's kind of like in the air. I'm surprised that it wouldn't just like at one point drop because it's like on an edge right now. Let's change that then. That should be possible to do so in the primitive collider, which is now in the shape here as a box. It's not a box, but it's a sphere. So luckily that option is there. And I guess you could, if you have more complex models, you can also potentially make a collider in the shape of the specific model, but as I know, at least from other simulators that I'm used to, like you don't want to have the collider be too complex, or else the simulation will be quite slow, or the engine will be quite slow in calculating all of those physical interactions and things like this. You want it to be simple. Luckily, the Roboball is already a ball, so a sphere collider would be just fine. Awesome. Okay, so there's now a sphere collider, so let's play the game again. So there's a little bit of a bounce. That's nice, but it's a bit boring though. I would like to have a little bit more of a bounce. And that is kind of only possible by replacing the actual default material with something that's a little bit more bouncy. Luckily, the O3DE has some common assets that we can explore. And let's see if we can find a bouncy physics material. Let's say rubber. That sounds bouncy. Right, so it has now a rubber material and physics material entire object. The physics primitive in the primitive collider component. Right, let's play the game. Definitely a little bit more of a bounce, it seems. But I don't think it's bouncy enough, to be honest. I want it to be super bouncy. Yeah, let's add some more bounce to it. So here is the rubber material that I already have, and if I want to change some of the aspects of it, I can open it in the asset editor. Alright, so this is then the rubber material. I would like to change it to something else. So like for instance, if I would do like 0 for dynamic fraction, let's give it no friction whatsoever, restitution, and yeah, let's do one. I guess restitution is like, you know, the amount of energy that's dissipated by the bouncing. And then you have minimum, friction combined, maximum. Yeah, it's like, you know, it's a heavy ball, but not that heavy. I think that will do it, of course. So let's save it as a new material in the project's asset folder. Rename, please. Materials. Do have to get a bit used to giving everything a capital, which is, I guess, like, you know, how they like to, one of their programming standards in O3DE is that they always want to start things with a capital. I want to call this material bounce. Just bounce. It's not really a material, but it's just like, you know, it's the characteristic that it will give. To close the asset editor and select, because they still have rubber as material, so I have to go and navigate to the Roboball project, assets material, and bounce physics material. There you go. So there's only one way to find out if it actually will bounce even further. Let's play it. Yay! It bounces forever. Physically not possible, but for the game purpose it's fine. Because if it's a Roboball, you would perhaps have something that would actually hit the floor and it will, like, you know, do like a skippy ball effect, or like, you know, some kind of actuator that hits down. So potentially that you can do that with like some kind of like collision contact or something like that with the floor that would do like a downward force. But for now it's just like purely only material. So.